Marcus wiped the grease from his hands as the salvage alert chimed through his workshop. Another derelict ship had drifted into the outer rim of human space, probably another merchant vessel stripped clean by raiders. He'd seen dozens of them over the past year, each one telling the same story of violence and abandonment that plagued this sector of the galaxy. The workshop smelled of burned metal and hydraulic fluid, a familiar comfort that reminded him why he'd chosen this life over the crowded stations near Earth. Out here on the frontier, a good mechanic could make an honest living fixing whatever broken machinery drifted his way. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it beat working for the corporate fleets that treated engineers like replaceable parts. His scanner picked up the vessel's signature as it tumbled slowly through the asteroid field. The ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of anything he'd worked on before. Its hull bore markings he didn't recognize, angular symbols that seemed to shift in the starlight. Whatever species had built it, they clearly weren't human allies. The design was too organic, too flowing for any of the known galactic powers. Marcus suited up and took his small repair shuttle out to investigate. As he drew closer, the ship's condition became apparent. Massive tears ran along its hull, and entire sections had been blown away by what looked like military-grade plasma weapons. This wasn't a simple raider attack. Someone had meant to destroy this vessel completely, and only luck had kept it from breaking apart entirely. The docking bay hung open to space, its atmospheric shields long since failed. Marcus guided his shuttle inside, noting the strange architecture that seemed to blend technology with something almost artistic. The walls curved in impossible ways, and bioluminescent panels cast an eerie blue glow throughout the corridors. Even powered down and damaged, the ship felt alive in a way that made his skin crawl. His boots echoed through empty passages as he explored the vessel's interior. The crew quarters were torn apart, furniture scattered, and walls scarred by energy weapons. Whatever had happened here, it had been violent and thorough. He found no bodies, which was both relieving and disturbing. Either the attackers had taken prisoners or something else had claimed the crew. The ship's central core drew him deeper into its maze-like structure. Here, the organic design became even more pronounced. The walls pulsed with a faint rhythm, and the air recycling systems hummed with a sound almost like breathing. Marcus had worked on alien vessels before, but nothing quite like this. The technology seemed to blur the line between machine and living creature. It was in the ship's deepest section that he heard the sound. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the deck plates beneath his feet. Marcus froze, his hand moving instinctively to the plasma torch at his belt. The sound came again, weaker this time, carrying a note of pain that made him hesitate. Following the sound led him to a sealed chamber that had somehow maintained its atmospheric integrity. The door bore warning symbols in the same angular script he'd seen outside, but his universal translator couldn't make sense of them. Whatever was behind that door, the ship's builders had wanted to keep it contained. Marcus spent an hour working on the door's locking mechanism, his curiosity overriding his caution. The technology was incredibly sophisticated, using principles he barely understood. When the locks finally disengaged, the door slid open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The chamber beyond took his breath away. It was enormous, easily 50 meters across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into shadows. But it was what occupied the center of the room that made him stumble backward in shock. A dragon lay chained to the floor, its scales a deep emerald that seemed to absorb the chamber's dim lighting. The creature was massive, at least 20 meters from nose to tail, with wings that had been bound tight against its body by restraints that pulsed with energy. The dragon's head turned toward him as he entered, revealing eyes like molten gold that held an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. The chains that held the creature were clearly designed for more than simple restraint. They hummed with power, sending periodic jolts of electricity through the dragon's body that made it convulse in pain. This wasn't just imprisonment. It was torture, designed to keep the creature weak and suffering. Near the dragon's massive head, Marcus noticed movement. A smaller form, no bigger than a house cat, pressed close against the larger creature's neck. It was clearly a hatchling, its scales the same emerald color but dulled by malnutrition. The young dragon looked up at him with eyes that held the same intelligence as its parent, along with a desperate hunger that made Marcus's heart ache. The adult dragon tried to raise its head, chains rattling with the effort. When it spoke, its voice was like distant thunder, words forming in his mind rather than reaching his ears through sound. The universal translator in his suit caught fragments of meaning, concepts, rather than words that painted a picture of anguish and hope. Help. Young one. Dying. Marcus stared at the massive creature, his mind reeling. Dragons were supposed to be myths, stories told to children about magical beasts from humanity's distant past. Yet here was one before him, clearly real and clearly suffering. The smaller one was indeed dying, its breathing shallow and irregular. The chains drew his attention next. They were technological marvels, but even marvels could be understood and overcome. Marcus had spent his entire adult life taking apart complex machinery, and these restraints were just another puzzle to solve. The question was whether he had the courage to try. Looking at the dying hatchling, Marcus realized he didn't have a choice. Whatever these creatures were, whatever they had done to deserve this treatment, the young one was innocent. No child, regardless of species, deserved to die in chains. He set down his tool kit and began examining the restraints more closely. The work would be dangerous. One wrong move could electrocute him or trigger security systems he couldn't detect. But as the small dragon's breathing grew even more labored, Marcus knew he had to try. The parent dragon watched him work, hope flickering in those ancient eyes. For the first time since entering the chamber, Marcus felt he was doing something truly important. Not just fixing broken machinery, but perhaps saving lives that had value beyond anything he'd ever imagined. The restraint system was more complex than anything Marcus had ever encountered. Each chain connected to a central control matrix that monitored the dragon's vital signs, adjusting the electrical current to maintain maximum pain without causing death. The sadistic precision of the design made his stomach turn. Whoever had built this torture device had wanted their prisoner to suffer for a very long time. Marcus worked methodically, tracing power conduits and data pathways through the chamber's walls. The system drew energy from the ship's main core, but it also had backup generators hidden throughout the room. Even if he cut the primary power, the chains would continue functioning. He needed to find the central processing unit and shut down the entire network at once. Hours passed as he crawled through maintenance tunnels and behind wall panels. The dragon watched his progress silently, occasionally offering encouragement through the mental link they seemed to share. The creature's name was Sarathis, and she had been imprisoned here for what felt like centuries, though time moved differently for her kind. The hatchling was her daughter, Kaelin, barely a year old by dragon standards. Sarathis had been pregnant when captured, forced to give birth in chains while her captors conducted experiments on both mother and child. The knowledge filled Marcus with rage that surprised him with its intensity. Through their mental connection, he learned fragments of their story. Sarathis belonged to an ancient race that had once ruled vast stretches of the galaxy, beings of incredible power and wisdom, who could manipulate energy itself. But their civilization had fallen to a younger, more aggressive species that saw dragons as either weapons to be enslaved or threats to be eliminated. The ship's attackers hadn't been random raiders. They had been liberation forces, other dragons attempting to rescue their imprisoned kin. The battle had been fierce but brief, with most of the ship's crew killed or fled. But the liberators had been forced to retreat before they could free the prisoners, leaving Sarathis and Kaelin to drift in space as their life support slowly failed. Marcus finally located the control matrix behind a panel near the chamber's ceiling. The device was a work of art as much as technology, its crystalline components pulsing with trapped energy. But it was also protected by defensive systems that would kill anyone who tampered with it improperly. He spent another hour studying the device's construction, mapping its connections, and identifying weak points. The work required a delicate touch and precise timing. One mistake would trigger security protocols that would flood the chamber with poison gas, killing all three of them. As he prepared to begin the disabling sequence, Kaelin's breathing stopped entirely. The young dragon's body went limp against her mother's neck, and Sarathis let out a cry of anguish that shook dust from the chamber's walls. Marcus felt the emotion like a physical blow, the mother's grief threatening to overwhelm his own thoughts. Desperation drove him to take risks he never would have considered. Instead of carefully dismantling the control matrix, he grabbed his plasma torch and began cutting through its primary connections. Alarms shrieked through the chamber as the system detected the intrusion, but Marcus continued working with steady hands. The first chain released with a thunderous crash, and Sarathis flexed her freed wing for the first time in decades. The movement was clumsy, muscles atrophied from long captivity, but the gesture was unmistakably one of hope. Marcus cut through 2 more connections before the security system activated emergency protocols. Gas began hissing from vents around the chamber, a greenish cloud that his suit's sensors identified as lethal to most known species. Marcus held his breath and continued working, even as his vision began to blur. He had to free at least one of Sarathis' arms so she could help finish the work. The 4th chain snapped free just as Marcus collapsed, his plasma torch clattering across the floor. Through fading consciousness, he watched Sarathis stretch her freed arm toward the control matrix. Energy coursed along her scales, a brilliant emerald light that made the chamber walls glow like jade. Dragons, it turned out, didn't need tools to manipulate technology. Sarathis' touch sent power surging through the restraint system in patterns it was never designed to handle. One by one, the remaining chains overloaded and fell away, their control circuits fried beyond repair. Free for the first time in centuries, Sarathis immediately turned her attention to her daughter. She gathered the limp form in her arms, pressing her snout against Kaelin's still chest. Energy flowed between them, the same emerald light that had destroyed the chains now working to restart a heart that had stopped beating. Marcus watched through his suit's failing oxygen supply as the young dragon stirred. Kaelin's eyes opened slowly, confusion giving way to wonder as she realized the chains were gone. Mother and daughter embraced with a joy that needed no translation, their mental voices singing with happiness that made Marcus smile even as darkness crept into his vision. His oxygen scrubbers were failing, poisoned by the security gas. In minutes, he would be dead. But watching the dragon's reunion, Marcus felt a satisfaction he'd never experienced from fixing broken machinery. He'd freed something precious, given a mother back her child. If this was how he died, at least it was for something worthwhile. Sarathis noticed his condition and moved toward him with surprising grace. Her massive form blocked out the chamber's lights as she leaned down, breathing gently on his helmet. The gas around him cleared instantly, dispersed by some property of her breath he couldn't understand. But the real miracle came when she touched his suit with one claw. Energy flowed into his life support systems, not the wild surge that had destroyed the chains, but a carefully controlled current that repaired damaged circuits and recharged depleted batteries. His oxygen levels stabilized, and the warning alarms in his helmet fell silent. "You saved us." Sarathis' voice was warm in his mind, carrying gratitude deeper than any words could express. "How can we repay such kindness?" Marcus struggled to sit up, still weak from his brush with death. Around him, the chamber had transformed. The walls that had seemed organic before now pulsed with new life, responding to Sarathis' presence. The ship itself was awakening, systems coming online that had been dormant since the attack. "I don't need payment," he managed to say aloud, knowing she would understand. "Just seeing you both free is enough." But even as he spoke, Marcus realized their problems were far from over. The ship was still damaged, drifting in space without navigation or proper life support. And somewhere out there, the forces that had enslaved these dragons were still active, still hunting for survivors to either recruit or eliminate. Sarathis seemed to read his thoughts. "The ship can be repaired, but we will need time and materials, and safety. Those who imprisoned us have many allies in this sector." Marcus nodded, understanding. The dragons needed a sanctuary somewhere to heal and plan their next move, and despite everything he'd just witnessed, despite the danger it would bring, he knew what he had to do. "I have a workshop," he said. "It's hidden, off the shipping lanes. You'd be safe there while we figure out what comes next." The grateful warmth in Sarathis's mental voice was all the answer he needed. Getting the massive dragon ship to Marcus's hidden workshop proved more challenging than he'd anticipated. Sarathis could operate many of the vessel's systems through her connection to its organic components, but the damage from the battle had severed critical pathways. They had partial engines and failing life support, barely enough to limp through space at a fraction of normal speed. The journey took 3 days instead of the usual 6 hours. Marcus worked alongside Sarathis, his mechanical expertise complementing her intuitive understanding of the ship's biological systems. It was fascinating to watch her work. Where he needed tools and careful calculation, she simply placed her hand on a damaged component and guided its healing through direct energy transfer. Kaylin proved equally remarkable in her own way. Despite her youth, she possessed a natural understanding of technology that astounded Marcus. She could sense power flows through walls and identify failing systems before any scanner detected problems. The young dragon's playful curiosity reminded him why he'd fallen in love with engineering in the first place. Marcus's workshop was built into an asteroid that had been hollowed out by miners decades earlier. He'd purchased it for almost nothing and spent years converting it into a fully functional repair facility. The asteroid's metal content masked energy signatures, making it invisible to most scanning systems. It was the perfect hiding place for refugees who needed to stay hidden. When they finally docked the dragon ship in his main hangar, Marcus realized how small his operation really was. The vessel dwarfed his workshop, its elegant curves making his utilitarian human architecture look crude by comparison. But Sarathis seemed genuinely impressed by what he'd built. "You created all this yourself?" she asked, her mental voice tinged with admiration as she explored the workshops and living quarters. "Took me 8 years," Marcus replied with pride. "Every tool, every system, built from salvage and spare parts." The dragons settled into the workshop with surprising ease. Sarathis was content to remain near her ship, working to repair the deeper damage that would take weeks to fully heal. But Kaylin was endlessly curious, following Marcus through his daily routines and asking countless questions about human technology and culture. The young dragon's enthusiasm was infectious. She marveled at simple tools, delighted in watching Marcus work on routine repairs, and showed an intuitive grasp of mechanical principles that took most engineers years to develop. In return, she shared dragon perspectives on energy manipulation and living technology that revolutionized Marcus's understanding of what was possible. Their peaceful routine lasted exactly 2 weeks before the hunters found them. Marcus was teaching Kaylin about plasma welding when his perimeter sensors detected incoming ships. 3 vessels. Military configuration heading directly for his asteroid. Their approach vector suggested they knew exactly where to look, which meant someone had betrayed the dragon's location. "Sarathis!" Marcus called, as alarms began sounding throughout the workshop. "We've got company!" The adult dragon emerged from her ship's depths, scales already beginning to glow with defensive energy. She read the tactical display instantly, her expression growing grim as she recognized the incoming vessel signatures. Hegemony hunters, she identified. They specialize in capturing my kind alive. Very dangerous, very persistent. Marcus was already running calculations. His workshop had defensive systems, but nothing designed to fight military vessels. The asteroid's mining charges might damage one ship if he could get them into the right position, but 3 ships would overwhelm his defenses easily. "Can your ship fight?" he asked. Sarathis shook her massive head. "Too damaged. We need at least another week before the weapons will function properly." The hunters were already transmitting surrender demands, their message harsh and uncompromising. They wanted the dragons handed over immediately, along with any humans who had assisted them. Marcus would be given a quick death if he cooperated. If he resisted, they promised something much worse. "There is another way," Sarathis said quietly. "But it would require you to trust us completely." Marcus looked at the tactical display showing the approaching ships, then at Kaelin's frightened face. The young dragon was trying to be brave, but her fear was obvious. There was really no choice at all. "What do you need me to do?" Sarathis led them back to her ship, moving with urgent purpose toward the central chamber where Marcus had first freed her. The space had been transformed during their stay at the workshop, organic components regrown and technology repaired until it hummed with barely contained power. "This ship is more than a vessel," Sarathis explained as she activated systems Marcus had never seen before. "It is a weapon designed to channel and amplify dragon energy, but it requires a willing partnership between dragon and another sentient species to function at full capacity." The chamber filled with displays showing the approaching hunters. Marcus could see them beginning to deploy capture nets and boarding pods, confident in their superior numbers. They had no idea what they were about to face. "I don't understand," Marcus said. "What kind of partnership?" Instead of answering with words, Sarathis placed one massive claw on his shoulder. Energy flowed between them, not the gentle touch he'd experienced before, but something deeper and more intimate. He felt his consciousness expand, touching the ship's living systems and understanding their purpose for the first time. The vessel wasn't just alive, it was intelligent, a symbiotic organism that could bond with compatible minds to become something greater than the sum of its parts. Marcus felt his engineering knowledge flowing into its organic computers, while its understanding of energy manipulation entered his thoughts. "Now you see," Sarathis said, her mental voice carrying new harmonics as their connection deepened. "Together, we can defend ourselves. But the bond, once made, cannot easily be broken. You would become part of something larger than yourself." Marcus looked at Kaelin, who was watching with wide eyes. The young dragon trusted him completely, had come to see him as family during their weeks together. He couldn't let her be recaptured, couldn't let her mother be enslaved again. "Do it," he said. The bond formed instantly, Marcus's consciousness merging with the ship's vast intelligence, while Sarathis provided the energy to awaken systems that had slumbered for millennia. Through the vessel's sensors, he could feel the hunters approaching, their thoughts filled with greed and cruel anticipation. Power flowed through conduits that were part metal and part living tissue. Marcus found himself controlling weapons he'd never imagined, energy cannons that could reshape matter at the molecular level. The ship moved around the asteroid with grace that defied physics, its hull rippling with protective fields that turned incoming fire into harmless light. The first hunter vessel died before its crew realized they were under attack. The ship's organic weapons didn't just destroy the enemy craft, they consumed it, breaking down its structure and adding its mass to their own systems. The second ship managed to fire several shots before suffering the same fate. The third vessel attempted to retreat, but Marcus felt a cold satisfaction as the ship's tendrils reached out across space to drag it back. These hunters had tortured his friends, had planned to enslave them again. They deserved no mercy. When the battle ended, Marcus found himself changed in ways he was still discovering. The bond with Sarathis and her ship had awakened capabilities he never knew he possessed. He could sense energy flows across vast distances, manipulate matter with focused thought, and understand technologies that had been beyond human comprehension. "What happens now?" he asked as they watched the debris of their enemies drift away into space. Sarathis's answer came with warmth and certainty. "Now we hunt the hunters. My people have been enslaved and tortured for too long. It's time for the galaxy to remember what dragons are truly capable of when they're free." Kaylin pressed close to both of them, her young mind already beginning to form the bonds that would make her part of their growing family. Marcus realized he'd found something he'd never expected to discover out here among the stars. Not just friends, but a purpose greater than fixing broken machines. The galaxy's balance of power was about to change. The age of dragon enslavement was ending, and the age of liberation had begun. And at the center of it all was a human mechanic who'd learned that sometimes the most important repairs couldn't be made with tools and spare parts. Sometimes they required courage, compassion, and the willingness to become something more than what you were before. Marcus smiled as their ship turned toward the stars, ready to write a new chapter in the ongoing story of justice among the cosmos.